Welcome to the Troubadour podcast. Today we are going to read The Idiot's Boy by William Wordsworth. This is another of his 1798 poems, and this I am doing in audio only. The reason I'm doing audio only on this poem is that this is a special ballad. In its time, it was quite controversial. Many people attacked it. Many even of William Wordsworth's friends attacked it. Though many people said it is quite beautiful and entrancing. Now, I don't want to spend a ton of time going through the background of the poem. I do want to read a little note, a letter that William Wordsworth wrote to a friend of his, John Wilson, defending this poem. So first, understand that the poem is called The Idiot Boy. One of the things it was attacked for was its portrayal of idiocy, or even not its portrayal of idiocy, but in fact, it portrays in the divine art of poetry idiocy at all. Now, I think many of us would agree in today's world that in art, you should be able to do what you want and create the kind of art that you desire. But there is something to be said that it is for elevated, enlightened, grand elements that we use poetry and the grand arts like poetry, which I would agree with. But of course, there is something to be said about these short little ballad poems about everyday life and about the people in the world and the actual experiences that they have. I think that art should be grand, but it can also be grand in its simplicity. And that, I think, is what Wordsworth is trying to go for. He's creating this epic ballad, a kind of epic ballad of a story, but it's really about a story of an idiot boy whose mother sends him on an errand when her neighbor, Susan, is sick. And he's supposed to go fetch a doctor, but he's an idiot. Not an idiot in the way that we may think of an idiot as, boy, you're just acting like an idiot. Oh, don't be an idiot, like someone who's ignorant, lacking of knowledge. An idiot in this sense, in the term that they're using it in the 18th century, is mental retardation of some sort. They don't have a term for it in the way that we have. They don't have a diagnosis for this individual. And he doesn't actually even spend a ton of time on the individual, but there is a long history of people with an actual, what we would consider some kind of mental retardation of some sort. Maybe it's Down syndrome or something along those lines, but he doesn't describe him in that sense. But the point is that this isn't not just a simple, oh, you're just being an idiot. Don't be an idiot. This is more like this person is actually mentally deficient in some manner. And he's being sent by his mother, who loves him, by the way. This is not a mother who is resentful. She is desperately loves him, and she believes that he can do this thing. And so she sends him out to this doctor, and he goes, you'll have to see what happens, on a kind of a journey. And it's in this ballad form that is traditionally, and if you've listened to the other Ballad Wednesday episodes that we've done where I read traditional ballads, you'll know that there is a history that this is pulling on of storytelling. And the storytelling of these either epic or, like King Arthur tales, those types of things. And that a ballad is basically just a song poem, a song story in a poetic fashion. And that's it. And it's a song story. And this is a poem story in the form with the rhythm and the meter of a ballad, of a traditional ballad. Now, the note is that the last stanza, so The Idiot Boy first was composed in 1798. And quote, the last stanza, which goes, the cocks did crow and the sun did shine so cold, was the foundation of the whole. The words were reported to me by my dear friend Thomas Poole, but I have since heard the same repeated of other idiots. Let me add this long poem that this long poem was composed in the groves of Alfoxden almost extemporaneously. Not a word, I believe, being corrected. though one stanza was omitted. I mention this in gratitude to those happy moments, for, in truth, I never wrote anything with so much glee. So, this has been reported by Wordsworth to be one of his favorite to write poems. It came to him kind of in a flash, even though it's a little longer than many of his other poems. Now, it's not hours long, it's a couple of pages of stanzas, very simple stanzas. I'm not exactly sure. I haven't timed myself reading it, but I imagine it'll take me a good 10, 15 minutes, which is another reason I wanted you to hear this only. I want you to hear the story. The words are pretty simple. I'm going to read it slowly so that you can, take it in. I would recommend really trying to pay attention to the words, maybe listen to it 2 or 3 times. I'll have on troubadourmag.com. I will put a full of the 1798 version, so it was changed. I'll put a little bit. I'll put the full version on troubadourmag.com so you can read it if you'd like there. And then at the end, I'll give a couple of the criticisms of it and a few parting thoughts. I won't go into too much detail, and we will not do a stanza by stanza breakdown. I think that the story is the important part, getting the entirety of the story. So I really hope you get it. There's a couple terms I really don't think, like he says, holly. For Johnny has his holly bough. And so he has like a little whip, like a little made of trees. And there's something, important about that with his character and the association. So I do want to say one thing beforehand, that I think there's a lot that could be said about this poem, and I'll try and touch on it as briefly as possible at the end. And if you guys are interested, I could do more. But there's a lot about how the relationships shift. So it's a grand tale in its sense, but it's also very subtle. And there's a lot that could be said in the story itself, but I think it's so simple in terms of the language used, and that's one of the interesting things about it. It's very beautiful. I hope I can do justice to the reading of it. Okay, so stick around afterwards, like I said, for a couple of criticisms, maybe a little brief breakdown of the overall story, and that'll be it for this episode. The Idiot Boy by William Wordsworth. 'Tis 8 o'clock, a clear March night. The moon is up. The sky is blue. The owlet in the moonlight air. He shouts from nobody knows where. He lengthens out his lonely shout. Halloo, halloo, a long halloo. Why bustle thus about your door? What means this bustle, Betty Foy? Why are you in this mighty fret? And why on horseback have you set him whom you love, your idiot's boy? Beneath the moon that shines so bright, till she is tired, let Betty Foy with girt and stirrup fiddle faddle. But wherefore set upon a saddle him whom she loves, her idiot boy? There's scarce a soul that's out of bed. Good Betty, put him down again. His lips with joy, they burr at you. But Betty, what has he to do with stirrup, saddle, or with rein? The world will say 'tis very idle. Bethink you of the time of night. There's not a mother, no, not one. But when she hears what you have done, oh, Betty, she'll be in a fright. But Betty's bent on her intent, for her good neighbor, Susan Gale. Old Susan, she who dwells alone, is sick, and makes a piteous moan, as if her very life would fail. There's not a house within a mile, no hand to help them in distress. Old Susan lies in bed in pain, and sorely puzzled are the twain, for what she ails they cannot guess. And Betty's husband's at the wood, where by the weak he doth abide. A woodman in the distant vale, there's none to help poor Susan Gale. What must be done? What will betide? And Betty from the lane has fetched her pony, that is mild and good, whether he be in joy or pain, feeding at will along the lane, or bringing faggots from the wood. And he is all in travelling trim, and by the moonlight Betty Foy has up upon the saddle set, the like was never heard of yet, him whom she loves, her idiot boy. And he must post without delay across the bridge that's in the dale, and by the church and o'er the down, to bring a doctor from the town, or she will die, old Susan Gale. There is no need of boot or spur, there is no need of whip or wand, for Johnny has his holly bough, and with a hurly-burly now, he shakes the green bough in his hand. And Betty, o'er and o'er, has told the boy, who is her best delight, both what to follow and what to shun, what do and what to leave undone, how turn to left and how to right. And Betty's most especial charge was, Johnny, Johnny, mind that you come home again, nor stop at all. Come home again, whate'er befall. My Johnny, do, I pray you do. To this did Johnny answer make, both with his head and with his hand, and proudly shook the bridle too, and then his words were not a few, which Betty well could understand. And now that Johnny is just going, though Betty's in a mighty flurry, she gently pats the pony's side, on which her idiot boy must ride, and seems no longer in a hurry. But when the pony moved his legs, oh, then for the poor idiot boy, for joy he cannot hold the bridle, for joy his head and heels are idle, he's idle all for very joy. And while the pony moves his legs, and Johnny's left hand you may see, the green boughs motionless and dead, the moon that shines above his head is not more still and mute than he. His heart it was so full of glee, that till full 50 yards were gone, he quite forgot his holly whip, and all his skill in horsemanship. Oh, happy, happy, happy John. And Betty is standing at the door, and Betty's face with joy o'erflows. Proud of herself and proud of him, she sees him in his travelling trim, how quietly her Johnny goes. The silence of her idiot boy, what hope it sends to Betty's heart. He's at the guidepost, he turns right. She watches till he's out of sight, and Betty will not then depart. Burr, burr, now Johnny's lips they burr, as loud as any mill, or near it. Meek as a lamb, the pony moves, and Johnny makes the noise he loves, and Betty listens, glad to hear it. Away she hies to Susan Gale, and Johnny's in a merry tune. The owlets hoot, the owlets curr, and Johnny's lips they burr, 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 and on he goes beneath the moon. His steed and he right well agree, for all of this pony there's a rumor, that should he lose his eyes and ears, and should he live 1,000 years, he will never be out of humor. But then he is a horse that thinks, and when he thinks his pace is slack. Now, though he knows poor Johnny well, yet for his life he cannot tell what he has got upon his back. So through the moonlight lanes they go, and far into the moonlight dale, And by the church and o'er the down, to bring a doctor from the town, to comfort poor old Susan Gale. And Betty, now at Susan's side, is in the middle of her story. What comfort Johnny soon will bring, with many a most diverting thing of Johnny's wit and Johnny's glory. And Betty's still at Susan's side. By this time she's not quite so flurried. Demure with porringer and plate, she sits as if in Susan's fate her life and soul were buried. But Betty, poor good woman, she, you plainly in her face may read it, could lend out of that moment's store 5 years of happiness or more to any that might need it. But yet I guess that now and then, with Betty all was not so well, and to the road she turns her ears, and thence full many a sound she hears, which she to Susan will not tell. Poor Susan moans, poor Susan groans, as sure as there's a moon in heaven, cries Betty, he'll be back again. They'll both be here, 'tis almost 10, they'll both be here before 11. Poor Susan moans, poor Susan groans, the clock gives warning for 11. 'Tis on the stroke, if Johnny's near. Quoth Betty, he will soon be here, as sure as there's a moon in heaven. The clock is on the stroke of 12, and Johnny is not yet in sight. The moon's in heaven, as Betty sees, but Betty is not quite at ease, and Susan has a dreadful night. And Betty, half an hour ago, on Johnny vile reflections cast. A little idle sauntering thing, with other names an endless string, but now that time is gone and past. And Betty's drooping at the heart, that happy time all past and gone. How can it be he is so late? The doctor he has made him wait. Susan, they'll both be here anon. And Susan's growing worse and worse, and Betty's in a sad quandary. And then there's nobody to say if she must go or she must stay. She's in a sad quandary. The clock is on the stroke of 1, but neither doctor nor his guide appear along the moonlight road. There's neither horse nor man abroad, and Betty's still at Susan's side. And Susan, she begins to fear of sad mischances, not a few, that Johnny may perhaps be drowned, or lost perhaps, and never found, which they must both forever rue. She prefaced half a hint of this with, God forbid it should be true. At the first word that Susan said, cried Betty, rising from the bed, Susan, I'd gladly stay with you. I must be gone. I must away. Consider, Johnny's but half-wise. Susan, we must take care of him, if he is hurt in life or limb. Oh, God forbid, poor Susan cries. What can I do? Says Betty, going. What can I do to ease your pain? Good Susan, tell me, and I'll stay. I fear you're in a dreadful way, but I shall soon be back again. Good Betty, go. Good Betty, go. There's nothing that can ease my pain. Then off she hies, but with a prayer that good poor Susan's life would spare till she comes back again. So through the moonlight lane she goes, and far into the moonlight dale. And how she ran, and how she walked, and all that to herself she talked, would surely be a tedious tale. In high and low, above, below, in great and small, in round and square, in tree and tower was Johnny seen, in bush and brake, in black and green. 'Twas Johnny, Johnny, everywhere. She's past the bridge that's in the dale, and now the thought torments her sore. Johnny, perhaps, his horse forsook to hunt the moon that's in the brook, and never will be heard of more. And now she's high upon the down, alone amid a prospect wide. There's neither Johnny nor his horse, among the fern or in the gorse. There's neither doctor nor his guide. O saints, what has become of him? Perhaps he's climbed into an oak, where he will stay till he is dead. Or sadly, he has been misled, and joined the wandering gypsy folk. Or him that wicked ponies carried to the dark cave, the goblin's hall. Or in the castle he's pursuing, among the ghosts, his own undoing. Or playing with the waterfall. At poor old Susan then she railed, while to the town she posts away. If Susan had not been so ill, alas, I should have had him still, my Johnny, till my dying day. Poor Betty, in this sad distemper, the doctor's self would hardly spare. Unworthy things she talked and wild. Even he, of cattle the most mild, the pony had his share. And now she's got into the town, and to the doctor door she hies. 'Tis silence all on every side. The town so long, the town so wide, is silent as the skies. And now she's at the doctor's door. She lifts the knocker, rap, rap, rap. The doctor at the casement shows his glimmering eyes that peep and doze, and one hand rubs his old nightcap. Oh, doctor, doctor, where's my Johnny? I'm here. What is it you want with me? Oh, sir, you know I'm Betty Foy, and I have lost my poor dear boy. You know him you often see. He's not so wise as some folks be. The devil take his wisdom, said the doctor, looking somewhat grim. What, woman, should I know of him? And grumbling, he went back to bed. Oh, woe is me! Oh, woe is me! Here will I die! Here will I die! I thought to find my Johnny here, but he is neither far nor near. Oh, what a wretched mother I! She stops, she stands, she looks about, which way to turn she cannot tell. Poor Betty! It would ease her pain if she had heart to knock again. The clock strikes 3, a dismal knell. Then up along the town she hies. No wonder if her senses fail. This piteous news so much it shocked her, she quite forgot to send the doctor to comfort poor old Susan Gale. And now she's high upon the down, and she can see a mile of road. Oh, cruel! I'm almost 60. Such night as this was ne'er before. There's not a single soul abroad. She listens, but she cannot hear the foot of horse, the voice of man. The streams with softest sound are flowing. The grass you almost hear it growing. You hear it now, if e'er you can. The owlets, through the long blue night, are shouting to each other still. Fond lovers, yet not quite hobnob, they lengthen out the tremulous sob that echoes far from hill to hill. Poor Betty now has lost all hope. Her thoughts are bent on deadly sin. A green-grown pond she just has passed, and from the brink she hurries fast, lest she should drown herself therein. And now she sits her down and weeps. Such tears she never shed before. Oh dear, dear pony, my sweet joy. Oh, carry back my idiot boy, and we will never overload thee more. A thought has come into her head. The pony, he is mild and good, and we have always used him well. Perhaps he's gone along the dell and carried Johnny to the wood. Then up she springs, as if on wings. She thinks no more of deadly sin. If Betty 50 ponds should see, the last of all her thoughts would be to drown herself therein. O reader, now that I might tell what Johnny and his horse are doing, what they've been doing all this time, oh, could I put it into rhyme, a most delightful tale pursuing. Perhaps, and no unlikely thought, he with his pony now doth roam the cliffs and peaks so high that are to lay his hands upon a star, and in his pocket bring it home. Perhaps he's turned himself about, his face unto his horse's tail, and still and mute, in wonder lost, all like a silent horseman ghost, he travels on along the vale. And now, perhaps, he's hunting sheep, a fierce and dreadful hunter he. Yon valley, that's so trim and green, in 5 months' time, should he be seen, a desert wilderness will be. Perhaps, with head and heels on fire, and like the very soul of evil, he's galloping away, away, and so he'll gallop on for aye, the bane of all that dread the devil. I to the Muses have been bound these 14 years by strong indentures. O gentle Muses, let me tell but half of what to him befell, for sure he met with strange adventures. O gentle Muses, is this kind? Why will ye thus my suit repel? Why of your further aid bereave me? And can ye thus unfriended leave me? Ye Muses, whom I love so well. Who's yon? That, near the waterfall, which thunders down with headlong force, beneath the moon, yet shining fair, as careless as if nothing were, sits upright on a feeding horse? Unto his horse that's feeding free, he seems, I think, the rein to give. Of moon or stars he takes no heed, of such we in romances read. 'Tis Johnny, Johnny, as I live. And that's the very pony too. Where is she? Where is Betty Foy? She hardly can sustain her fears. The roaring waterfall she hears, and cannot find her idiot boy. Your pony's worth his weight in gold, then calm your terrors, Betty Foy. She's coming from among the trees, and now, all full in view, she sees him whom she loves, her idiot boy. And Betty sees the pony too. Why stand you thus, good Betty Foy? It is no goblin, 'tis no ghost, 'tis he whom you so long have lost, he whom you love, your idiot boy. She looks again, her arms are up, she screams, she cannot move for joy. She darts as with a torrent's force, she almost has o'erturned the horse, and fast she holds her idiot boy. And Johnny burrs and laughs aloud, whether in cunning or in joy, I cannot tell. But while he laughs, Betty a drunken pleasure quaffs, to hear again her idiot boy. And now she's at the pony's tail, and now she's at the pony's head. On that side now, and now on this, and almost stifled with her bliss, a few sad tears does Betty shed. She kisses over and over again him whom she loves, her idiot boy. She's happy here, she's happy there, she is uneasy everywhere, her limbs are all alive with joy. She pats the pony, where or when she knows not, happy Betty Foy. The little pony glad may be, but he is milder far than she. You hardly can perceive his joy. Oh, Johnny, never mind the doctor. You've done your best, that is all. She took the reins, when this was said, and gently turned the pony's head from the loud waterfall. By this the stars were almost gone. The moon was setting on the hill. So pale you scarcely looked at her, the little birds began to stir, though yet their tongues were still. The pony, Betty, and her boy wind slowly through the woody dale. And who is she, betimes abroad, that hobbles up the steep rough road? Who is it? But old Susan Gale. Long Susan lay deep lost in thought, and many dreadful fears beset her, both for her messenger and nurse. And as her mind grew worse and worse, her body it grew better. She turned, she tossed herself in bed. On all sides doubts and terrors met her. Point after point did she discuss, and while her mind was fighting thus, her body still grew better. Alas, what has become of them? These fears can never be endured. All to the wood, the word scarce said, did Susan rise up from her bed, as if by magic cured. Away she posts, up hill and down, and to the wood at lengthen is come. She spies her friends, she shouts a greeting. Oh me, it is a very merry meeting, as ever was in Christendom. The owls have hardly sung their last, while our 4 travelers homeward wend. The owls have hooted all night long, and with the owls began my song, and with the owls must end. For while they all were traveling home, cried Betty, tell us, Johnny, do, where all this long night you have been, what you have heard, what you have seen, and Johnny, mind you tell us true. Now Johnny all night long had heard the owls in tuneful concert strive. No doubt, too, he the moon had seen, for in the moonlight he had been from 8 o'clock till 5. And thus to Betty's question, he made answer like a traveler bold. His very words I give to you. The cocks did crow, to-hoo, to-hoo, and the sun did shine so cold. Thus answered Johnny in his glory, and that was all his travels story. All right. Well, I hope you enjoyed hearing that, and perhaps you might want to re-listen to it. Now, I just want to give a quick little overview, and then I'll read a couple of criticisms, one in poem form by Lord Byron, who really attacked Wordsworth for this. And then I do have my own philosophical criticisms, which I don't think I want to go into too deeply here, just because it could go on and on and on. But I do think this is a beautiful ballad poem. The story is tight, it's simple, it's all integrated. There's a theme going on throughout this. And, so some of the philosophical thematic problems I have is, maybe it'll even become clear if you've listened to this podcast before. But I think the basic thing here that's going on is, it starts off, and I think it's not a coincidence that it's an owlet, right? And hopefully you caught that. An owlet is a young owl, O-W-L-E-T. So it begins, 'tis 8 o'clock, a clear March night. The moon is up, the sky is blue, the owlet in the moonlight air. He shouts from nobody knows where. He lengthens out his lonely shout, halloo, halloo, along, halloo. And I don't know if I'm doing that the best way. It's, it's an owlet, I guess, makes a slightly different sound than an owl. It's not the whoo that we might hear from an owl, but a hoo. So it sounds like a hello. So it starts with an owl. And then remember, if you just notice at the end here, they talk about The owls have hardly sung their last, while our four travelers homeward went. The owls have hooted all night long, and with the owls began my song, and with the owls must end. There's a relationship between the owls and Johnny. Johnny at the end, right? What is he? He only says, this is the only lines in the whole poem, and they're the idiot boy lines, right? So this is a person without reason, right? He has no reasoning ability. He's pure emotion. He goes where the pony leads him, right? So if you know the whole, what is it? Ancient Greek Platonic idea that we're all riding on this, that our will, our free will, the thing that makes choices, our reasoning ability and our emotions. And we also have appetites. They would break it up into 3 categories, but our will is like on a wild horse, and it's kind of, our emotions are like a wild horse, and, we have to be the reasoning rider controlling it. And it's a struggle, and sometimes we fail. Well, Johnny doesn't fight the emotions. He just goes with wherever the wild horse is. Now it's a calm horse. So this is there's a deep metaphor going on throughout this whole story. This whole poem, the ballad, I mean, a poem is in a sense a metaphor for the most part. It's a broad, most poems are broad metaphors. And that's no different here. And remember the words that he uses. The cocks did crow. So he calls the owls cocks for once, like a type of bird, right? So he thinks it's morning. So this is what's happening, is he's reversed everything. He's such an idiot in a sense that he's reversed all of existence and reality. So it's almost like he's on a different plane of existence. So the cocks, like the roosters, did crow, right? The cocks did crow, but it's owls. So we associate owls with night and, roosters with morning. So for him, he thinks he says the cocks did crow, to hoo, and the sun did shine so cold. Well, why did the sun shine cold? Because it's the moon. It's not the sun, right? So and this is why he's an idiot boy. So there's a problem with him. But notice what happens in the story between the characters. And it's not unimportant. I mean, everything in here is super important. It's not unimportant that Susan Gale gets better. She's cured. And it says in here, as if by magic. Well, where's the magic? The magic is in the wood. So alas, so she says, Susan Gale says she's sitting in her bed by herself, sick, dying. So everyone believed. And she says, alas, what has become of them? These fears can never be endured. All to the wood. That's the last quote of her. I'll to the wood. I'm going to go to the woods. The word scarce said, did Susan rise up from her bed, as if by magic cured. So there's something about the moral behind this, that going to the woods is a sort of magic, that there's a magic place to it. And I think that's what Wordsworth is really trying and impelled to say, is that so this is supposedly based on a story he heard. Someone told him a story, and he wrote or spoke out loud, and I think his sister Dorothy wrote down this poem from him. So he basically heard this story, he was walking with his sister, and then he starts, extemporaneously reciting this, and it just came to him. And so you can just imagine William Wordsworth just walking in the woods, just thinking, he's in his late 20s at this point, and he thinks, 'tis 8 o'clock, clear March night. The moon is up, the sky is blue, the owlet on the moonlight air. So on and so forth. So that's how he supposedly, and I don't have any reason to disbelieve him. I mean, he was a genius poet, and I do know that it's been said that many of his poems were written in this way, where he would actually walk around and he would recite it, from his head, and then Dorothy or someone else, his wife, sometimes Mary Wordsworth later in life, would write them down for him. And then, of course, he would go back and edit meticulously. He was a meticulous editor. So that probably would have been a part of this process. Although, I should say, not in this poem, actually. So he says that this came to him extemporaneously, and this is one of the few poems that he's left the way it was. So anyway, but the story, so the point is that you can imagine him kind of walking in the woods, and he gets this idea of the idiot boy. So it's this boy that doesn't have his reasoning faculties. That's essentially what's going on. So when the romantics are talked about as not being pro reason, this is a good example that proves that point. He chooses a human, a person with the body of a human being, but who's more closely aligned to the mental faculties of an animal. And there's an association between the owl's nature, the pony that he's riding, the little horse that they keep referring to and keep bringing out. So he's on this like little horse, and he goes out on this little adventure. Of course, he doesn't do anything. He just walks around with the horse. He plays with this little branch, and he listens to the waterfall. He listens to the cocks crow, which are actually the owls. Right? He's listening at night, but he thinks it's the daytime. But in the midst of this, Betty at first freaks out. She believes something horrible has happened. He's gone with gypsies. He's been drowned. It's like a normal mother's fears of what might happen to any child, let alone one with a, mental disability. And so she decides to leave Susan, her best friend, her neighbor, who she took, Betty in all of her confidence because she loved her son and she believed he could do great things. And for him, this would be going to the doctor, getting the doctor to come back. And so she does this. And after a certain amount of time, she starts to lose confidence. And then she goes out trying to find him. She goes to the doctor. He's very rude to her, right? I tried to put that in my voice a little bit. He's rude. So the doctor, the man of science and reason, isn't helpful here. That's not a coincidence. Okay, so if you know my podcast, you know where I'm having some trouble with this poem in terms of the thematics of it, but it's so clear and it's such a good work of art that illustrates his view on this. It's a perfect work of art, and it's an integrated integrated manner of being about this animalistic boy who goes out into the world, and everyone around him, it affects everybody around him, but not him. He's not affected at all. He goes in the wood, and the only way because that's where he belongs. He's part of the wood. He's like, he's like some kind of like a wood nymph, like a dryad, Pan. And he goes in, and he, just does whatever he does. We don't really know that much about it. There's a couple of perhaps he did this, perhaps he did that, but we don't know, right? He's just out in the thing and in the wild. His mother goes wild herself trying to find him. The doctor doesn't help. She keeps looking, and then she finds him just kind of playing by a waterfall with the cute little pony. And the change, like she thinks that there's a point when she wants to commit suicide, right? So if you caught that, the suicide isn't called suicide because Wordsworth is a great writer. He doesn't just say it, suicide. Although it's pretty clear. Her thoughts are bent on deadly sin. That's deadly sin is suicide. But of course, he does make it clearer by saying, lest she should drown herself therein in the same stanza. So it's pretty clear she's thinking about it, but then she thinks, wait a second. That horse, the pony, he is mild and good. Nature is mild and good, and we have always used him well. So we haven't abused our natural companion. Perhaps he's gone along the dell and carried Johnny to the wood, which is exactly what he did. And so she thinks no more of deadly sin. The last of all her thoughts would be to drown herself therein. Now this is when we get all the perhapses of what's going on with Johnny, right? Perhaps, and no unlikely thought, he with his pony now does roam the cliffs and peaks so high that are to lay his hands upon a star. And we get all these romantic ideas. Maybe he's going out to get a star. Maybe he's become a horseman's ghost. Maybe he's become a hunter of sheep. Maybe he's become the devil, right? But there's all these kind of supernatural assumptions about what's happening to him, and that he's, associated with this kind of magic. And then, of course, Betty finds her and she finds him. She hugs him. There's a reunion. He doesn't think anything's happened. He's like, oh, okay, great. Hi, Mom. And then they start walking. It's like, oh, who's this person? Who is it? But old Susan Gale. She's right there. And then we learn that Susan, through magic, is cured. How is she cured? The moment she says the word, The word scarce said. What's the word? Wood. I'll to the wood, right? So she makes that statement, I'm going to go to the woods, and then she's cured like magic. And that's what Wordsworth is trying to get at is this is a simple story of two women who, in their own little community have found solace, salvation in the woods. And what led them there? Who was their guide? The little boy, the little idiot boy, the boy that is not of reason, the boy that is all emotion, all, there's a nobility to him. So I've talked about this on other podcasts about Wordsworth, the effect, the impact intellectually of Rousseau's noble savage and even the noble children, how children are born noble, which I think is ludicrous. Children are not born noble. But that's another discussion. So that is a basic synopsis of what's going on in this poem. Now let's go into just a quick little criticism by Lord Byron in poem form. Now Byron really went after Wordsworth and many of the romantics who all, Wordsworth and Coleridge brought Romanticism. They founded Romanticism in many ways. And Byron is coming right after him, and he is already in 1809, he's attacking him and Johnny Foy. So that's Betty Foy's son, the idiot boy who's Johnny. His last name's Foy, obviously. And Byron basically associates in many of his thoughts on this poem, Wordsworth's simplicity, his idiocy. That word, he associates Wordsworth hinting that he's the idiot, and for doing this kind of poem. So here's just a little cute passage, not cute, but a little passage poem from Byron. Next comes the dull disciple of thy school, that mild apostate from poetic rule, the simple Wordsworth, framer of a lay as soft as evening in his favorite May, who warns his friend to shake off toil and trouble, and quit his books for fear of growing double, who both by percept and example shows that prose is verse and verse is merely prose, convincing all by demonstration plain, poetic souls delight in prose insane. And Christmas stories tortured into rhyme, catch that, tortured into rhyme. Christmas stories tortured into rhyme contain the essence of the true sublime. Thus when he tells the tale of Betty Foy, the idiot mother of an idiot boy, a moon-struck silly lad who lost his way, and, like his bard, confounded night with day, so close on each pathetic part he dwells, and each adventure so sublimely tells, that all who view the idiot in his glory conceive the bard the hero of the story. So there's, a couple harsh jabs against him. One of the things that I, agree with in a sense, and that I think is a legitimate criticism of Wordsworth, although I don't know, I'm not convinced that Wordsworth was 100% convinced himself of this. He just, it is commonly attributed to him that he is like this. And that's where Byron here, when he says, warns his friend, quote, to shake off toil and trouble and quit his books for fear of growing double. So toil and trouble, that's from a Shakespeare play. And Byron is kind of playing on the idea of Wordsworth's problems with reading books, but in the actual, in what he's doing in this poem by Byron, he's actually pointing out, well, Shakespeare is great and he's in books, right? Toil and trouble. And it's a quote from Shakespeare. It's like, but you can't attack books, fool. Right. And he's saying, oh, you'll go, double, but then you're not going to have Shakespeare if you don't read books. Right. And so it's a subtle little attack, I think, or not so subtle. But there's a lot of little jabs like that. And that's one that I do think Wordsworth was conflicted about, that he did have some problems with reason, and he attacked reading books too much. He said you should go out into the wild sometimes and into the world, and that I think is so I think he's right about that, but I think he does have some poems where he said, or he does have some poems where he says, put down those books and go out into the wild, and you'll learn more from a dandelion or something like that than from 1,000 years of books. But then, of good, he was an intense reader. Like, he read a lot, so it's not fully accurate that he was against reading. I think what he was saying was, don't just read, right? You should go out into the world as well. And so what I think he gets attacked with is like this anti-literature, anti-literary desire where he just wants to be out in the woods. And that's just not accurate. It's not a clear way of looking. It's not a fully fleshed out way of looking at William Wordsworth. Wordsworth was pro books. In fact, he actually did a lot to try to change many of the publishing methods of publishing. He was one of the first people who made cheap books in his time. So he made books that were cheaper because he wanted more people to have his books, right? He wanted to make some money from it. He tried very hard throughout his life to make money. He worked even to change some of the legislation for the copyright laws in his era because he wanted to have retained the rights longer so he could make more money and his family could make more money after his death. So I just think that people are loading onto him this view of Romanticism, which I do not see fully. And it's just a cliche paper, just too thin of an argument about what Romanticism is. So yes, I do think there is a little bit of an attack on a certain way of reasoning, which was what I would call rationalism, not reasoning. So when they talk about imagination, the Romantics, particularly Coleridge and Wordsworth, they're talking about reason, what I would call reason, integrating what your eyes, your ears, your mouth, your five senses are the five pathways to your mind, using your imagination to integrate them into new forms in your individual mind and coming up with your own concepts, although they didn't use that term. That's what they believed in. But don't just read books and not look at reality for yourself. That's what they preached, and that's true. That's what you should do. So I think they're absolutely 100, like they're correct. They are early and they haven't fully fleshed it out, and they're not philosophers, and they needed other philosophers, and they were betrayed by the philosophers of their era. But this attack, like the idea of being a Descartesian rationalistic philosopher, where you can get everything by just going inward into your own mind. That's not good, and that's not inaccurate way of approaching the world, and that's what they were trying to attack from. And of course, philosophically, they do kind of come from the John Locke empirical world, where they are interested in empiricism and how to do that. They're British, so that's where they're coming from on some level. And then, of course, there is some mixture of bad philosophies. So that's basically, I think, what's going on. I do disagree with the idea that you should never read books, which I think is like some places in Wordsworth a little bit, but I think people way overemphasize that message in Wordsworth. He is saying, go out in the world and experience and look at the world and come to your own imaginary forms. Now, this story, though, and I'll end with this, is about an idiot boy who doesn't have reason. And so this is a good example that, is saying, hey, reason isn't everything. And he's even kind of attacking reason by attacking the doctor. And I agree. I don't agree with that. So I understand the critics there. But my point is simply that that's not the total story. This is one poem. This is early in his life. It was a great poem. He was, trying to do something new and on its own. And he's heard this story and he wanted to tell a story in beautiful verse that used everyday language. So the language he's using is more everyday than what you would get in poetry before that, prior to him. And that is important as well. And that's an important discovery. And the reason he wanted to do that, or one reason, is he wanted to explore all aspects of reality, all other aspects that people weren't looking at. And he wanted to bring the beauty out in there. Now, you could disagree with him doing that, but I think it's an important way to shift how we think about the world. To say, hey, let's look at this thing here. Let's also look at these individual people, these peasants who live lives and they have grand adventures, and let's have a grand adventure with them. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed that poem, The Idiot's Boy by William Wordsworth, and join me for on troubadourmag.com or on Facebook, Troubadour Mag, at Troubadour Mag, and I'll be doing more Sunday morning poetries, more Metaphysical Mondays, and we're almost finished with Lyrical Ballads, so we'll be finishing that up in the next couple of weeks. Thank you, and until next time.